The dawn broke with a fiery splendor across the horizon, but Lillian Montgomery could scarcely spare a moment to appreciate it. Her calloused hands gripped the plow as she leaned her slight frame into the harness, willing her tired body forward through the stubborn earth. 6 months since her father's passing, and the weight of Sycamore Ranch pressed down on her shoulders like an anvil. Texas in 1873 was no place for a woman alone, especially not in the small town of Ardmore, settled in the northern reaches of the state. The townsfolk had given her 3 months before she'd sell. That deadline had come and gone, yet here she remained, her 22-year-old frame growing leaner with each passing day of backbreaking labor. "Come on, Bessie," Lillian encouraged the old draft horse that pulled alongside her. The animal's breathing was labored, matching her own. "Just to the end of this row." The morning sun climbed higher as Lillian worked, her cotton dress sticking to her back with perspiration. Her auburn hair, hastily pinned beneath a wide-brimmed hat, had begun to escape its confines. The wheat needed planting before the weather turned, but at this rate, she'd be lucky to prepare half the field in time. She paused to wipe her brow with her sleeve when the distinct sound of hoofbeats approached from the neighboring property. Shielding her eyes against the sun, Lillian watched as a rider on a chestnut stallion cleared the low stone wall separating their lands. Ethan Parker, her neighbor to the west. She'd seen him in town occasionally, exchanging polite nods but little else. His reputation preceded him, a former cavalry scout turned successful rancher. Rumors of his prowess with both gun and lasso circulated freely among the young women in town, along with whispered comments about his striking appearance. As he approached, Lillian straightened her spine. She wouldn't appear weak before anyone, especially not a man who probably thought she had no business running a farm. "Miss Montgomery," Ethan called, tipping his hat as he brought his horse to a stop beside her plow. His voice was deep, carrying easily across the distance between them. "Looks like you're tackling quite a job here." Lillian nodded stiffly. "Mr. Parker, just getting the winter wheat in." Ethan dismounted in one fluid motion, his tall frame unfolding from the saddle. Up close, his features were even more striking, eyes the color of a summer storm, weathered skin bronzed by the sun, and a jawline that looked carved from granite. He couldn't be much past 30, yet carried himself with the confidence of a much older man. "You're plowing mighty shallow," he observed, kneeling to run his fingers through the overturned soil. "Won't hold moisture when the dry spells come." Irritation flashed through Lillian. "I'm managing just fine, thank you. Didn't say you weren't." He stood, dusting his hands on his denims. "But that wheat won't yield half what it could with proper plowing." "I'm aware of proper farming techniques, Mr. Parker," Lillian retorted, her chin lifting defiantly. "My father taught me well, but Bessie isn't as strong as she once was, and I can only ask so much of her." Ethan's gaze softened as he regarded the tired draft horse. "I see." He was quiet for a moment, studying the vast expanse of unplowed field stretching before them. "I've got 2 draft teams sitting idle this week. My hands and I could have this field turned properly in 2 days." Lillian's pride bristled. "I don't accept charity, Mr. Parker." "Who said anything about charity?" A hint of amusement danced in his eyes. "My southern pasture needs clearing of stones before winter. Trade of labor seems fair enough." Lillian hesitated. She needed help desperately so, but accepting it felt like admitting defeat. Ethan seemed to read her thoughts. "Your father was a good man, Miss Montgomery. He'd want that wheat planted proper." The mention of her father softened her resolve. Thomas Montgomery had been respected throughout the county, known for his fair dealings and hard work. He'd built Sycamore Ranch from nothing, and she was determined not to let it slip away. "Very well," she conceded, But I work alongside your men. I won't sit idle while others tend my land." A smile broke across Ethan's face, transforming his features. "Wouldn't expect anything less. We'll start tomorrow at first light." He mounted his horse with practiced ease. "And Miss Montgomery, might be a good idea to rest that horse today. She looks about done in." With that, he tipped his hat and rode away, leaving Lillian standing in the field, her heart pounding with a mixture of relief and trepidation. She'd never needed anyone's help before. Her independence had become her armor after losing both mother and father. Yet as she unhitched Bessie from the plow, Lillian couldn't deny the warm feeling spreading through her chest. Perhaps accepting help didn't mean surrendering after all. True to his word, Ethan arrived the next morning before the sun had fully crested the horizon. He wasn't alone. 4 men accompanied him, along with 2 teams of massive Percherons, their coats gleaming in the early light. Lillian had been up since well before dawn, preparing a hearty breakfast of biscuits, bacon, and coffee. It wasn't much, but she wouldn't have men working her land without offering something in return. "Hope you're hungry," she called as they rode into the yard. She dressed practically in her father's old trousers, cinched tight at the waist and rolled up at the ankles, and a loose cotton shirt. Her hair was braided tightly down her back. Ethan's eyes widened slightly at her attire, but he said nothing as he dismounted. "Men, this is Miss Montgomery. Her wheat field needs plowing and we're going to see it done right." The men removed their hats respectfully. Ethan introduced them one by one: Miguel, his foreman, brothers Sam and John, and a younger man called Riley. They were a weathered lot, their faces lined from years of outdoor work, but their eyes were kind as they greeted her. "There's coffee and food on the back porch," Lillian said. "Please help yourselves before you begin." The men needed no second invitation, making their way toward the promise of breakfast. Ethan lingered behind, his gaze sweeping over the farmhouse and outbuildings. "Your father built this place solid," he commented. "Good bones." Lillian nodded, unexpected emotion tightening her throat. "He never did anything halfway. Something his daughter seems to have inherited." Ethan's observation carried no mockery, only quiet respect that warmed Lillian more than she cared to admit. After a quick but hearty breakfast, they moved to the fields. The difference was immediately apparent. With the powerful draft teams pulling proper plows, the earth turned deeply, revealing rich, dark soil beneath. True to her word, Lillian worked alongside them. She drove one of the teams while Ethan handled the plow, showing a strength that belied her slender frame. By mid-morning, they had accomplished more than she had in 2 full days of work. "You handle those horses well," Ethan remarked during a brief water break. Sweat dampened his shirt, clinging to broad shoulders as he leaned against a fence post. "My father believed everyone on the farm should know every job," Lillian replied, accepting the dipper of water he offered. "Said you never know when you'll need to step in. Wise man." Ethan's gaze lingered on her face a moment too long, causing her to look away. The day progressed with steady work, conversation flowing easier as hours passed. Lillian learned that Ethan had come to Texas after the war, purchasing the neighboring ranch when its elderly owner decided to move east to live with his daughter. In 5 years, he transformed the struggling cattle operation into one of the most prosperous in the county. When the sun began its descent toward the horizon, they had plowed nearly half the field. Muscles aching pleasantly from honest work, Lillian invited the men to stay for supper. "That's kind but unnecessary," Ethan said. "We brought provisions." "I insist," Lillian countered. "It's the least I can do." Her cooking skills might not match her farming abilities, but the venison stew she'd prepared that morning had simmered all day, filling the kitchen with savory aromas. The men ate ravenously, praising her cooking with such enthusiasm that Lillian felt a blush creep into her cheeks. As the workers settled on the porch with after-dinner coffee, Ethan offered to help with the washing up. "I can manage," Lillian protested, but he was already rolling up his sleeves. "My mother would tan my hide if I let a lady clean up alone after feeding a crew of hungry men," he said, taking a plate from her hands. They worked in companionable silence, Lillian washing while Ethan dried. The domesticity of the moment struck her suddenly. How long had it been since she'd shared such simple tasks with anyone? "Why are you really helping me, Mr. Parker?" she asked abruptly. Ethan paused, a plate suspended in his hands. "Does there need to be a reason beyond being neighborly?" "In my experience, men don't offer help without expecting something in return." A shadow crossed his features. "Then you've known the wrong sort of men, Miss Montgomery." He placed the dried plate carefully on the stack. "Your father helped me when I first arrived here, barely knowing which end of a cow was which. Never asked for anything in return. I'm simply returning a favor long overdue." Shame washed over Lillian at her suspicion. "I apologize. That was unwarranted. No need for apologies." "World's given you reason to be cautious, I expect." His voice held no judgment, only understanding. They finished the dishes in silence, but it was a different quality now, thoughtful rather than tense. The next day brought similar industry, and by sunset, the entire field lay plowed and ready for seeding. Lillian marveled at what so many hands working together could accomplish. As Ethan's men began loading equipment onto wagons, she approached him. "I'll be over to help with your stone clearing tomorrow," she said. Ethan shook his head. "No need, that was just an excuse." "An excuse to help without wounding your pride." His smile was gentle. "But if you're determined to repay the debt, I wouldn't say no to one of those apple pies I smell baking for Sunday dinner sometime." Before Lillian could respond, Riley approached with an urgent message. One of Ethan's prize bulls had broken through a fence line. The moment of connection between them broke as Ethan called his men to mount up. "Thank you," Lillian called as they rode away, the simple words inadequate for the gratitude she felt. Ethan turned in his saddle, silhouetted against the setting sun. "Just being neighborly, Miss Montgomery." The days that followed found Lillian seeding her wheat field. Though physically demanding, the task seemed lighter somehow, knowing the soil had been properly prepared. Occasionally she would pause, eyes drifting toward the Parker ranch, wondering what Ethan was doing. Nearly a week passed before she saw him again. Lillian had ridden into Ardmore for supplies, her wagon loaded with the last of her father's tobacco crop to trade at the general store. The streets were busier than usual, Saturday bringing farmers and ranchers from outlying areas. She was negotiating with Mr. Hollister, the store proprietor, when a commotion erupted outside. A group of drunken cowhands had cornered a young woman against the wall of the saloon, their intentions clearly dishonorable. Without hesitation, Lillian abandoned her transaction and strode toward the scene, fishing pole in hand. "Leave her be," she commanded, her voice carrying across the street. The cowboys turned, momentarily surprised to see a woman confronting them. Their leader, a burly man with a week's growth of beard, recovered quickly. "Mind your business, lady," he growled. "This ain't no concern of yours." "Any man who accosts a woman in broad daylight makes it the concern of every decent person," Lillian retorted, stepping closer. Her heart hammered in her chest, but she kept her expression resolute. The cowboy advanced toward her, liquor fueling his courage. "You need a lesson in manners, missy." "And you need a lesson in respecting ladies," came a familiar voice as Ethan stepped between them. He hadn't drawn his gun, but his hand rested casually near it. "Back away, Jenkins. You and your boys have had enough entertainment for one day." The tension crackled between the men. Jenkins clearly calculated his odds against Ethan's reputation and found them wanting. "Just having some fun," he muttered, backing down. "Find it elsewhere," Ethan suggested coolly. "Preferably outside town limits." The cowhands retreated, muttering obscenities but making no further trouble. The young woman they'd been harassing fled toward the millinery shop, throwing a grateful look over her shoulder. "That was foolhardy," Ethan said, turning to Lillian. His voice was tight with concern. "Those men are Blackwell's crew. They don't take kindly to interference." "I wasn't going to stand by and watch," Lillian replied, though her hands trembled slightly now that the danger had passed. Ethan's expression softened. "No, I don't suppose you would." He glanced at her wagon. "Let me help you finish your business. Might be safer if you're not alone right now." Together they returned to the general store, where Mr. Hollister quickly concluded their transaction, clearly eager to hear about the confrontation. Ethan loaded Lillian's supplies into her wagon with efficient movements. "I'd feel better if you'd let me escort you home," he said as she climbed onto the wagon seat. "There's no need," Lillian began. "Please," Ethan interrupted. "Jenkins has a mean streak, especially when his pride's been wounded." Something in his tone convinced her. "Very well." Ethan mounted his horse, riding alongside as they left town. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the trail as they traveled, conversation flowing more easily than Lillian expected. She found herself laughing at Ethan's tales of his early ranching misadventures. "So there I was," he continued, "chasing this calf through the creek, mud up to my knees, when I realized I'd left the gate open and the entire herd was following us both." Lillian's laughter rang out, surprising her with its freedom. "What did you do?" "Only thing I could do, kept running and hoped Miguel would figure out what happened before they all ended up in the next county." They were so engrossed in conversation that they nearly missed the riders approaching from a side trail. 4 men on horseback, Jenkins among them. "Well, look here," Jenkins called, his voice slurred with continued drinking. "The high and mighty Parker and his lady friend." Ethan's posture changed instantly, alertness replacing relaxation. "Ride on, Jenkins, we've no quarrel with you." "That's so. I think the lady and I have unfinished business." Jenkins's hand moved toward his holster. "Lillian," Ethan said quietly, "take the reins and be ready to drive." She nodded imperceptibly, gathering the leather straps into her hands. "Last chance to ride away," Ethan warned, his voice carrying a dangerous edge. Jenkins drew his gun, but Ethan was faster. A single shot rang out, the bullet striking Jenkins's hand. The man howled in pain, his weapon dropping to the dirt. "Next one won't be so merciful," Ethan stated. "Now ride away before I decide you're not worth the bullets." The show of skill and the cold certainty in Ethan's voice convinced the cowboys. Cursing, they retreated, Jenkins cradling his injured hand against his chest. When they were out of sight, Ethan exhaled slowly. "Are you all right?" Lillian realized she'd been holding her breath. "Yes, thank you. Those men might cause more trouble. Blackwell protects his hands, even the worst of them." Concern etched deep lines around Ethan's eyes. "I can handle trouble," Lillian assured him, though uncertainty gnawed at her. She was alone at Sycamore Ranch with no one to watch her back. Ethan seemed to read her thoughts. "I'll have Miguel ride by your place regularly for a while, just to be safe." The gesture touched her. "That's very kind, but no buts," Ethan interrupted gently. "Neighbors look out for each other. That's how we survive out here." They continued toward Sycamore Ranch, the earlier lightheartedness replaced by a vigilant awareness of their surroundings. When they reached her gate, Ethan insisted on checking the outbuildings and house before leaving. "Everything seems secure," he reported, returning to where she waited by the porch. "Keep your shotgun loaded just in case." "I always do," Lillian replied. Ethan hesitated, seeming reluctant to leave. "That pie offer still open. Sunday dinner tomorrow." The invitation surprised her. "You want to come for dinner, if the invitation stands." There was something in his eyes beyond mere politeness, a warmth that made her heart beat faster. "It does," she heard herself saying. "Around noon." His smile transformed his face again. "I'll be here." He mounted his horse, tipping his hat. "Lock your doors tonight, Lillian." It was the first time he'd used her given name. The sound of it in his deep voice lingered in her mind long after he'd ridden away. That night, Lillian found herself taking extra care with preparations for Sunday dinner. She killed her fattest chicken, set bread dough to rise, and selected the ripest apples from her cellar for the promised pie. As her hands worked, her mind drifted to Ethan, his quiet strength, the gentleness underlying his capable exterior, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled. She caught herself and shook her head. Foolish thoughts. He was being neighborly, nothing more. A woman alone on the frontier needed allies, and that's all this was: practical frontier friendship. Still, she found herself setting her hair in rags before bed, something she hadn't bothered with since before her father's passing. Sunday morning dawned clear and mild. Lillian rose earlier than necessary, putting the finishing touches on her preparations. She wore her best dress, a simple blue cotton that brought out the color of her eyes, and pinned her hair in a softer style than her usual practical braid. Precisely at noon, Ethan rode into the yard. He dressed for the occasion as well, wearing a clean white shirt and dark vest beneath his riding coat. His dark hair was slicked back, still damp from washing. "Something smells mighty fine," he commented as she welcomed him onto the porch. His appreciative gaze took in her appearance, lingering a moment longer than strictly proper. "Fried chicken, mashed potatoes, fresh bread, and apple pie," Lillian listed, inexplicably nervous. "Nothing fancy." "Sounds like heaven to a man who's been eating his own cooking too long." Ethan removed his hat as he entered the house, revealing the cowlick at his crown that refused to stay tamed. The meal passed with surprising ease. Ethan proved to be a thoughtful conversationalist, drawing Lillian out on subjects she rarely discussed: her childhood dreams, her mother's stories, her father's lessons. In turn, he shared tales of his own upbringing in Missouri, his time scouting for the cavalry, and his determination to build something lasting in Texas. "This land gets in your blood," he mused, accepting a second slice of pie. "Can't imagine being anywhere else now." "My father felt the same," Lillian agreed. "Mother wanted to move back east after the war, but he couldn't bear to leave what he'd built." A comfortable silence fell between them as they lingered over coffee. Ethan finally broke it with a question that caught her off guard. "Why did you stay, Lillian, after your father passed? Most women would have sold up and moved somewhere easier." She considered the question seriously. "This is my home. Every fence post, every field, I helped build it alongside my father. Leaving would feel like abandoning him somehow." She traced the rim of her coffee cup. "Besides, I'm not afraid of hard work." "That's plain to see," Ethan acknowledged. "Still, it's a heavy burden for anyone alone." "Are you suggesting I can't manage?" A defensive edge crept into her voice. "Not at all." His eyes held hers steadily. "Just that you shouldn't have to do everything alone. None of us should." Something in his gaze made her heart flutter strangely. Before she could respond, a distant rumble of hooves broke the moment. Ethan was on his feet instantly, moving to the window with the fluid grace of a man accustomed to danger. His expression hardened as he looked out. "Riders coming. 5 or 6. His voice was clipped. "Jenkins among them." Fear and anger battled within Lillian as she rose. This is my property. They have no right. They're not here about rights. Ethan moved to retrieve his gun belt from where he'd hung it by the door. They're here about revenge. I have my father's rifle, Lillian said, already moving toward the cabinet where it was stored. Ethan caught her arm gently. Let me handle this first. If talking fails, then we'll do what needs doing. The riders pulled up in the yard, Jenkins at the front. His right hand was bandaged, his face twisted with malice. Ethan stepped onto the porch, his stance relaxed but alert. That's far enough, gentlemen. This ain't your property, Parker, Jenkins called. We got business with the Montgomery woman. Any business with Miss Montgomery goes through me. Ethan's voice carried easily across the yard. Jenkins spat onto the dirt. Figures you'd be warming her bed. Always were soft on helpless females. Lillian stepped onto the porch beside Ethan, rifle in hand. I'm hardly helpless, Mr. Jenkins, and you're trespassing on my land. Jenkins's eyes narrowed. You cost me work, woman. Blackwell laid me off on account of this hand until it heals. He patted his holster. Seem only fair you provide compensation. The only thing you'll get here is more lead if you don't turn around now, Ethan stated, his hand hovering near his gun. The standoff stretched taut as a fiddle string. Lillian could feel her pulse pounding in her throat, but she kept the rifle steady, aimed at Jenkins's chest. The tension broke with the sound of approaching riders, a lot of them. From the west came a dozen mounted men, Miguel at their head. Ethan's ranch hands, armed and ready. Jenkins and his companions suddenly found themselves badly outnumbered. The calculation was visible on his face. This ain't over, he threatened, but the words lacked conviction. It is if you're smart, Ethan replied. Blackwell won't thank you for starting a range war over wounded pride. The mention of their employer seemed to sober Jenkins's companions. One of them leaned over to mutter something in Jenkins's ear. After a moment of visible struggle, Jenkins yanked his horse around. You watch your back, Parker, he called as they rode away. When they were out of sight, Lillian's knees nearly buckled with relief. Ethan steadied her with a gentle hand at her elbow. How did your men know to come? She asked. I asked Miguel to ride by mid-afternoon just to be safe, Ethan explained. When he saw Jenkins and his boys heading this way, he gathered the others. Gratitude washed over her. Thank you. She faltered, emotions suddenly too close to the surface. No need to thank me. Ethan's eyes were warm on hers, though I reckon Jenkins was right about one thing. What's that? This isn't over. Men like that nurse grudges. He looked out toward the horizon where dust still marked the rider's departure. I don't like the idea of you out here alone right now. Lillian straightened her spine. I won't be intimidated off my land. Never thought you would be, Ethan said with a hint of admiration. But there's no shame in accepting help when trouble's brewing. Miguel approached the porch, touching the brim of his hat respectfully. Boss, we can set up a rotation. Keep someone watching the place for a few days. Ethan looked to Lillian, clearly letting the decision be hers. Pride warred with practicality within her. The harvest would be upon her soon. She couldn't afford to spend nights watching for trouble instead of resting. I would appreciate the help, she conceded. Just until Jenkins calms down or moves on. Ethan nodded to Miguel, who returned to organize the men. Some departed while others began settling in around the property, establishing watch positions. They're good men, Ethan assured her. They'll be discreet. The remainder of the afternoon passed in a strange domestic tableau. Ethan's presence in her home should have felt intrusive, yet somehow it seemed right. They settled into surprisingly comfortable routines, Ethan splitting more firewood than she'd need for a month, while Lillian prepared a simple supper for the hands keeping watch. As twilight descended, Ethan reluctantly prepared to leave. "Miguel will take first watch. I'll be back in the morning." "You don't need to," Lillian began. "I want to," Ethan interrupted gently. "Besides, your wheat field needs checking. First sprouts should be showing by now." Something had changed between them, a shift so subtle she couldn't name it, yet profound enough that she felt it in every glance they exchanged. "Until tomorrow, then," she said softly. Ethan paused at the bottom of the porch steps, looking back at her. "Tomorrow," he agreed, and it sounded like a promise. True to his word, Ethan returned the next morning. And the next. What began as protective vigilance gradually transformed into something else entirely. Each day brought him to Sycamore Ranch with a different purpose, helping mend fences, checking on the emerging wheat shoots, bringing news from town. Jenkins and his cohorts had apparently moved on, taking work at a ranch further west, but Ethan continued to visit. His attention to her property extended beyond security, to genuine assistance, the kind of help that recognized her capability while easing her burden. 2 weeks after the confrontation, they walked the wheat field together, examining the tender green shoots pushing through the rich soil. "Going to be a fine crop," Ethan observed, satisfaction evident in his voice. "Proper plowing made all the difference." "I couldn't have done it without your help," Lillian acknowledged, her earlier pride softened by gratitude. "You'd have found a way," Ethan said confidently. "You're the most determined woman I've ever met." The admiration in his voice warmed her. They continued walking, shoulders occasionally brushing in a way that sent unexpected shivers through her. "Harvest will be here before we know it," she remarked, mentally calculating the weeks until the wheat would be ready. "I've been thinking about that." Ethan's tone turned thoughtful. "My cattle operation doesn't demand much attention in early autumn. My men and I could help with your harvest." Lillian stopped walking. "That's too much, Ethan. You've already done more than enough." "Not offering charity," he assured her quickly. "A percentage of the yield would be fair compensation." She studied his face, searching for hidden motives but finding only sincerity. "Why are you really doing all this?" Ethan looked away, his gaze traveling across the field to the horizon beyond. "When I first came to Texas, I was alone, had some money from my Army days but no real knowledge of ranching. Your father saw something in me worth investing in. He taught me, guided me, challenged me." His eyes returned to hers. "I'm just paying forward what he gave me." "Is that all?" The question escaped before Lillian could consider its implications. Something shifted in Ethan's expression, a vulnerability she hadn't seen before. "No," he admitted quietly. "That's not all." Her heart quickened as he stepped closer. "I find myself thinking about you when we're apart," he continued, his voice low. "Looking for reasons to ride over, wondering what you're doing, if you're safe, if you're happy." The confession hung in the air between them. Lillian's breath caught in her throat as Ethan reached out slowly, giving her every chance to step away. When she remained still, he gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "I've grown mighty fond of you, Lillian Montgomery." The simple declaration sent warmth cascading through her. "I've grown fond of you too," she whispered. His smile was like sunrise breaking over the plains. "Then perhaps you'll permit me to call on you properly, not just as a neighbor lending a hand, but as a man courting a woman he admires." Lillian nodded, not trusting her voice. Ethan's hand lingered against her cheek for a moment before he stepped back, respecting the propriety they both valued. "I should go," he said reluctantly. "Got cattle to move to the north pasture before nightfall. Will you come for Sunday dinner again?" Lillian asked. "Wild horses couldn't keep me away." His eyes held a promise that stayed with her long after he'd ridden from view. The weeks that followed transformed Lillian's life in ways she never imagined. Ethan courted her with a gentle persistence that respected her independence while offering companionship she hadn't known she craved. Sunday dinners became a cherished ritual, often extending into long afternoons of conversation on the porch swing. The wheat grew tall and golden under the Texas sun. True to his word, Ethan brought his men and equipment when harvest time arrived. Together, they cut, bundled, and threshed the crop, yielding more than Lillian had dared hope. On the final day of harvest, as the last wagon of wheat made its way toward the barn, Ethan found Lillian standing at the edge of the now empty field. The setting sun painted the landscape in hues of amber and gold, matching the wheat they'd gathered. "Penny for your thoughts," he said, coming to stand beside her. Lillian smiled, contentment filling her chest. "I was thinking my father would be proud. This is the best harvest we've had in years." "He would be proud of you," Ethan corrected gently. "Not just for the harvest, but for how you've kept this place going through sheer determination." "And good neighbors," she added, turning to face him. Ethan took her hands in his. They were both dirty from the day's work, clothes dusty with chaff, faces sun-kissed and weary. Yet in that moment, Lillian had never felt more beautiful than she did under Ethan's admiring gaze. "Lillian," he began, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant, "these past months have been the happiest of my life. Being with you feels right in a way nothing else ever has." Her heart began to race as he dropped to one knee before her, still holding her hands in his. "I love you," he said simply. "I love your strength, your kindness, your fierce independence. I love how you face every challenge head-on. I love that you've let me be part of your life." He paused, drawing a deep breath. "I'm asking if you'd consider making that arrangement permanent. Will you marry me, Lillian Montgomery?" Tears blurred her vision as joy welled up within her. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, Ethan, I'll marry you." He rose, pulling her into an embrace that lifted her feet from the ground. When he set her down, his hand cupped her cheek tenderly. "May I kiss you?" he asked, his voice husky. In answer, Lillian rose on tiptoes, pressing her lips to his. The kiss was gentle at first, then deepened with shared longing. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless. "I love you," Lillian said, the words flowing naturally. "I think I have since you first rode over to help with my plowing." Ethan's laugh was rich with happiness. "And here I thought you found me presumptuous." "Oh, I did," she confirmed with a smile, "but also kind, and that made all the difference." The news of their engagement spread quickly through Ardmore. Most received it with approval. The union of two adjoining properties made practical sense, and the couple's obvious affection for each other satisfied romantic sensibilities. They were married on a crisp October morning, the ceremony held in the small church in town. Lillian wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully altered to fit her slender frame. Ethan cut a striking figure in a new black suit, his usually wind-blown hair tamed for the occasion. The celebration afterward combined their two worlds, Ethan's ranch hands mingling with Lillian's farming neighbors in a feast that lasted well into the evening. As twilight fell, the newlyweds slipped away to Sycamore Ranch, now their shared home. "Welcome home, Mrs. Parker," Ethan said softly as he carried her across the threshold. Lillian's heart swelled with emotion. "It feels right, you being here." Their first night as husband and wife was a tender discovery of each other, Ethan's patience and gentleness dissolving Lillian's initial nervousness. In the safety of his arms, she found a passion she'd never known existed, their bodies coming together as naturally as their hearts had. Later, as they lay entwined in the darkness, Ethan traced lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "I've been thinking about our land." "MMM." Lillian murmured, content and drowsy. Between your wheat fields and my grazing land, we could build something remarkable. His voice was animated with vision. Diversify more ad orchards on the eastern slopes, maybe some dairy cattle, less vulnerable to drought or market fluctuations that way. Lillian propped herself up on one elbow, studying his face in the moonlight streaming through the window. You've given this considerable thought. Been planning since the day I met you, Ethan admitted with a grin. Though back then, it was just neighborly interest in good farming practices. Is that what they're calling it these days? She teased, pressing a kiss to his chest. Well, that and being smitten by the most beautiful, stubborn woman in the county. He pulled her closer, his expression growing serious. I want to build something that lasts, Lillian. Something our children and grandchildren will be proud to inherit. The mention of children brought a flush to her cheeks. I'd like that, she whispered. Very much. The months that followed were a blissful adjustment to married life. They decided to make Sycamore Ranch their primary residence, with Ethan riding daily to oversee operations at his property. The homes weren't far apart, but they already discussed building a new house someday, positioned perfectly between their combined lands. Winter settled over Texas with unusual severity that year. Heavy snow blanketed the countryside, forcing them to remain close to home. They spent evenings planning the spring planting, Ethan's practical ranching knowledge complementing Lillian's farming expertise as they mapped out expanded fields and improved irrigation systems. On a particularly cold January night, as wind howled around the eaves of their home, Lillian shared news that brought tears of joy to Ethan's eyes. A baby, he repeated after she told him, wonder filling his voice. You're certain? As certain as can be, she confirmed, placing his hand over her still flat stomach. Come summer, there will be 3 of us. Ethan gathered her in his arms with reverent tenderness. I love you, he murmured against her hair. Both of you, spring arrived with renewed purpose. Ethan threw himself into preparing for both the year's crops and their growing family. He built a cradle with his own hands, carving delicate designs of wheat stalks and wildflowers into the headboard. Lillian's body changed as the wheat grew, her slender frame softening with the miracle of new life. Despite her condition, she insisted on helping with the planting, though she conceded to directing operations from horseback rather than walking the fields herself. You're the most stubborn woman alive, Ethan declared one evening as he massaged her swollen feet. You knew that when you married me, she reminded him with a smile. And thank God for it every day, he replied, pressing a kiss to her palm. Our child will have your determination, I expect. And your kindness, Lillian added softly. Your sense of justice. The baby arrived on a scorching July afternoon, a healthy boy with Ethan's dark hair and Lillian's clear blue eyes. They named him Thomas after her father. Hello, little one, Ethan whispered, holding his son for the first time, awe etched across his features. Welcome to the world. Motherhood brought new challenges, but Lillian adapted with the same determination she applied to everything. Ethan proved to be a devoted father, often carrying Thomas in a sling across his chest as he worked around the ranch, pointing out cattle and crops to the infant as though the child could understand every word. The harvest that fall was abundant beyond their hopes. With their combined land now working in harmony, cattle grazing on wheat stubble, enriching the soil for the next planting, they found themselves more prosperous than either had been separately. We should celebrate, Ethan suggested as they tallied the final figures of their yield. Invite the neighbors, have a proper harvest festival. Lillian agreed enthusiastically. They opened their home on the first weekend of October, welcoming friends and neighbors from miles around. Tables groaned with food, A fiddler played lively tunes, and children played games on the expansive lawn. As twilight descended, Ethan found Lillian standing on the porch, Thomas sleeping peacefully against her shoulder. He slipped an arm around her waist, drawing her close. "Happy?" he asked simply. Lillian leaned into his embrace, surveying the scene before them, their land stretching toward the horizon, friends and neighbors dancing in their yard, their sun warm and solid between them. "More than I ever thought possible," she answered truthfully. Years passed, each season bringing new joys and challenges. The Parker Montgomery holdings grew as they acquired adjacent properties, becoming one of the most successful combined ranching and farming operations in the county. Their reputation for fair dealing and quality produce spread throughout the region. Thomas grew into a strong, thoughtful boy with his father's easy charm and his mother's quick mind. He was joined by a sister, Emma, whose arrival coincided with a particularly bountiful wheat harvest, and later by another brother, James, born during a winter so mild it allowed for planting weeks earlier than usual. Through it all, Ethan and Lillian's partnership deepened. The challenges that might have broken a weaker bond only strengthened theirs, drought years that tested their diversification strategy. A barn fire that required rebuilding, illnesses that reminded them of life's fragility. On their 10th anniversary, Ethan surprised Lillian with a gift she hadn't expected: the deed to Jenkins's old property, which had come up for sale after its owner moved to California. "Now our land stretches all the way to Clayton Creek," he explained, spreading a map across their dining table after the children were in bed. "Perfect for the apple orchards you've been wanting to plant." Lillian traced the expanded boundaries with wonder. "It's becoming everything we dreamed," she murmured. "And more," Ethan agreed, drawing her into his arms. 10 years of marriage had only deepened his attraction to her. The slender girl had matured into a woman of quiet confidence, laugh lines around her eyes speaking of a life well lived. "Remember when I found you trying to plow that field alone? How could I forget?" Lillian laughed, resting her head against his chest. "I was so determined to prove I could manage without help. And now look at us managing so much more together." His voice held pride and contentment in equal measure. "I never thanked you properly," Lillian said suddenly, looking up at him. "For what?" "For seeing what I needed before I could admit it myself. For offering help in a way that preserved my dignity." She reached up to trace the familiar lines of his face. "For loving me enough to stand beside me rather than trying to take over." Ethan captured her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "Loving you has been the easiest, most natural thing I've ever done. Even when I'm stubborn," she teased. "Especially then," he confirmed with a grin. "Though I notice you've gotten better at accepting help over the years. I've had a good teacher." Her expression softened. "What do you think my father would say if he could see us now?" Ethan considered the question seriously. "I think he'd be proud beyond words, not just of what we've built, but of the family we've created, the legacy that will continue long after we're gone." They stood together at the window, looking out at the moonlit expanse of their land, no longer his or hers, but truly theirs. Fields that had once been nearly lost now flourished under their combined care, promising security for generations to come. "We should build that new house we've talked about," Lillian suggested, "right on the ridge where both properties meet. The children are getting bigger, and this place, much as I love it, is getting crowded," Ethan finished. "I've been thinking the same. Could start this spring, have it ready by next winter." The plans flowed naturally between them, each contributing ideas shaped by their shared vision. As always, they found balance, Lillian's practical considerations complementing Ethan's innovative approaches. Later that night, as they lay in each other's arms, Ethan whispered, Thank you for saying yes that day in the wheat field. Best decision I ever made, Lillian replied softly. Though I think we both know I was never really alone, not from the moment you rode over to help with my harvest. And I'll be helping with harvests for the rest of our lives, Ethan promised. Forever? Lillian asked, echoing the words of a vow made years ago. Forever, Ethan confirmed, sealing the promise with a kiss. Outside their window, the land they'd nurtured together stretched beneath the stars, testament to what could grow when determination met kindness, when independence found partnership, when a woman trying to run a farm alone and a cowboy neighbor willing to help discovered that together they could build something enduring enough to last forever.